Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Liam Looks At, and today we are finally looking at the first Berserker Khazan. I started this game, I believe, over a month ago. I was beating games pretty quickly, and this one definitely stumped me, so I'm excited to kind of get into it, talk about what I liked, talk about what I didn't like, and go over it as a whole. So I just reviewed Neo 3, which I absolutely loved, and I talked about difficulty and things like that, so I'm going to get into that here soon, but I do want to mention that, this is a Souls-like game, but it's more so as weird as to say, a Neo-like game. First of its kind, really, where it takes a lot of inspiration from Neo. Now, the one it doesn't have gear. It doesn't drop gear like as often as Neo, but it definitely falls a lot with it. It's a lot more about making builds. The bosses have tankier health pools. It is level based, which I talked about was a pro for Neo for me because you could go back and just replay levels. So it shares a lot of that DNA, and that's something that I really appreciated because I think that it's something you don't see in a lot of Souls games. They try to copy Dark Souls, they try to copy Bloodborne or whatever it is. So it's really nice to see them copy my favorite of them, not copy, but take a lot of inspiration from. The main thing I want to focus on, because I think that it's something I noticed throughout the whole game, is the difficulty. This is by far the hardest game I have ever played in my entire life. I always solo bosses for the most part. I think like one or two bosses I haven't soloed, but for the most part I do. And if I don't, there's usually I usually go back and I'm able to do it once I kind of learn the patterns. This was a challenge and a half. I will say the bosses are so tanky. They have unbelievable health pools to the point which I find it unfair. It didn't matter how leveled up I was. It didn't matter how much damage it said that my weapon was doing. I felt like I was doing nothing. These battles went on for 10, 15 minutes sometimes, which doesn't seem that long, but when you really think of it, that's a really long time to be fighting a boss. And if you die, it's over. You got to restart. Now, I will say, I played on what I believe is the intended difficulty, but they did update it with normal, easy, and expert. So I played it on expert. So I do think that it's not a negative. They definitely knew that they made a game that was very hard, and they went back and the normal mode was definitely the original easy mode. But I didn't want to play in the normal mode. I wanted to play on the difficulty that was intended when the game came out, and that was the expert difficulty. I didn't want to summon, so I didn't summon. But some of these bosses, man, I'm telling you, every single boss besides the first two stumped me for at least a day, if not 2 days. I talked about Neo 3. I talked about how I beat these bosses in 1 to 2 tries. These bosses were brutal. The levels itself weren't too bad. I didn't find the levels all that interesting, unfortunately. It was something that I think was a little lacking, personally. It wasn't something that super interested me. I think the enemies throughout the levels, some of them were cool. Some of the enemy designs were, I think, a little bit boring. The bosses is really where this game stands out. And I will say something that I felt every single time I beat a boss, was I felt like I learned it. A lot of the time when you fight a boss and you're having a lot of trouble and you finally beat it, it can feel like, hey, I just finally did it. I got lucky that time. I never once felt like I got lucky fighting a boss. I feel like I actually learned the moveset, and I think that is a huge pro. I still think the health pools are too big. I still think the fights go too long, but I will say this game does a really, really good job of all the bosses have patterns. There are things that you learn. The more you fight them, the more you learn their patterns and how to fight them. I think that's something awesome. The other thing that I felt a little negative on was there's only 3 weapon types. Now, I think all 3 weapon types are extremely fun to play as. I ended up going spear for most of the game. I switched to the dual wield for one boss, and then I finished up the game with the great sword, which is the reason I finished it out was just because I needed to do more damage. But I feel like the weapons are really well built out. They all have these huge, massive skill trees that you can add extra moves and things like that. And that's really great. But I would have liked to see maybe a few more weapon types, maybe something in a future game. Just because with the amount of builds and things that they want you to do and the amount of gear that's thrown at you, the fact that you can only really spec for one weapon. I mean, you have to choose either strength or dexterity or whatever the other one is. I don't remember. Each weapon essentially scales with one main attribute. So it felt like you pick a weapon and you stick with it. Same with the skill points. I mean, you can't, if you want to max out a weapon and really feel powerful at the end of the game, you cannot put skill points into any other tree that isn't that main weapon. So while it's very easy to respec, it felt to me like it was something that I didn't want to do unless I was really stuck at a boss, because I spent the whole game learning this new moveset, Spear specifically. I learned Spear, I knew how to work Spear, and I just eventually I had to change it, and then I had to relearn a whole new weapon type because I just felt like I wasn't doing the damage, as opposed to where Neo, let's say you're having trouble with a boss and you want to switch to axe, you can switch to an axe pretty easily and you've got enough skill points to level that skill tree up. I just feel like it could use more weapons and it could use a lot more skill trees. Now, something I did notice about this game that I really liked is, you know, a lot of the times when you die, especially to a boss, you lose your souls or you have to come back and recollect them. In this game, not only are they outside the boss arena, which I love, so you never really lose them unless you know, whatever. This game gives you souls just for getting far in a boss. So if you're really banging your head against a boss, you're continually leveling up when you're fighting that boss, which was great because I was under-leveled for the final boss. I was pretty much under-leveled this whole game, unfortunately. I think I went through it a little too fast, which is probably why I had so many issues. If I just went back and actually, like, level my character up more. I probably ended about 10 levels under level for the final boss. But the nice thing was, you know, I was like 20 levels under leveled for him. And as I continued to fight and beat my head against the wall, I was leveling up and I was adding to that. So that's something I really like because you feel like you are making progression. Even if you're losing to a boss again and again and again, it is something that is great to feel. You know, to kind of wrap up my thoughts, because I feel like I've talked a lot about difficulty, I think the story was fine. It's a kind of cool story where you and your buddy Ozma are two, you know, warriors who had taken down the dragons, and now you are both kind of arrested for crimes that you didn't commit, and it kind of becomes this whole thing. I don't want to get too much into spoilers, but I do think the story is serviceable. You know, for a Souls game, I've never really been super into the stories, but I think this one was pretty good. I think it was fun. It definitely had a very anime art style, and the story kind of followed that anime-esque kind of tropes and things like that, which is great. This game's fantastic. I'm not going to lie and say I wasn't getting extremely angry at it, and there was a time where I didn't think I was going to be able to beat it, but I will say I'm glad I stuck with it. It is a fantastic game. It's probably one of the best Souls games I've ever played, and it is something that I hope that they do more of them. This game I'm going to give it a thumbs up. I'm not going to give it 2 because I think the difficulty was out of control, but it is a great game, and I'm definitely excited to see what else the studio makes. But yeah, that's all I have for this one. Working on some more games. I should have, I believe, Stalker Call of Pripyat is almost done, so that should probably be the next review I have, and then I've got Kingdom Come Deliverance and more games and more streaming. So thanks everybody for checking out, and I'll check you on the next one. See ya.